On December 24, 2002, Christmas Eve, the quiet suburb of Modesto, California, was wrapped in holiday calm. Twinkling lights lined the streets, families prepared for the next day's celebrations, and carols echoed faintly in the distance. In a modest home on Covina Avenue lived Laci Peterson, a 27-year-old woman, 8 months pregnant with her first child, a boy she and her husband had named Connor. Laci was known for her warm smile, her love of gardening, and her excitement about becoming a mother. That morning, she was last seen in her home, planning a simple day, watching television, baking, and walking the family dog, Mackenzie. By evening, she had vanished without a trace. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses to any struggle, just an empty house and the dog wandering alone in the backyard, still leashed. Her husband, Scott Peterson, returned from what he described as a fishing trip and reported her missing around 5:30 p.m. Within hours, the disappearance of this pregnant young woman on Christmas Eve captured national attention. Volunteers combed parks and fields, posters bearing Laci's radiant photograph spread across the city, and news outlets broadcast non-stop updates. The case quickly escalated from a missing person report to one of America's most scrutinized true crime stories. Evidence would soon point to betrayal within the marriage itself. This is the documented account of Laci Peterson's disappearance, a tragedy that revealed the hidden darkness beneath an ordinary suburban life, involving infidelity, deception, and ultimately murder. Laci Denise Rocha met Scott Lee Peterson at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo in the mid-1990s. Both were agriculture students. Laci studied ornamental horticulture, while Scott focused on agricultural business. They dated for several years before marrying on August 9, 1997, in a small ceremony in California. After graduation, the couple settled in Modesto, where Scott took over his family's restaurant business and later worked in fertilizer sales. Laci worked part-time as a substitute teacher and ran a small gardening business from home. They purchased a modest house on Covina Avenue and appeared to lead a typical suburban life, active in their community, close to family, and planning for children. By late 2002, Laci was 8 months pregnant with their first child. Friends and family described her as joyful and devoted, eagerly preparing for motherhood. Scott, outwardly supportive, helped set up the nursery. To the outside world, they were a happy young couple on the verge of starting a family. Beneath the surface of their seemingly stable marriage, cracks had begun to appear. Scott Peterson was leading a separate life that Laci knew nothing about. In late 2002, he began a romantic relationship with Amber Fry, a 27-year-old massage therapist and single mother from Fresno. Scott met Amber through a mutual friend in November 2002, only weeks before Laci's disappearance, and presented himself as single. He never mentioned being married or expecting a child. Their relationship quickly became intimate. They went on dates, exchanged gifts, and spoke frequently by phone. Amber later stated that Scott told her he was not married and even claimed he would be spending Christmas alone because he had lost his wife earlier that year. These lies allowed him to maintain the illusion of freedom and avoid the responsibilities of impending fatherhood and marriage. To friends and family, Scott appeared attentive and excited about the baby. But privately, he was pursuing a life without the commitments he had made to Laci. December 24, 2002, began as an ordinary morning in the Peterson home. Laci, 8 months pregnant, was seen by neighbors around 8:30 a.m. watering plants in the front yard. She wore gray sweatpants and a white maternity top. Family members later confirmed she spoke on the phone with her mother, Sharon Rocha, around 8:40 a.m., sounding normal and cheerful. She mentioned plans to bake cookies and watch Martha Stewart on television. Scott left the house shortly after, claiming he was going fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away. He said goodbye to Laci and took their small aluminum boat and fishing gear. Laci was alone at home with the dog, Mackenzie. No one reported seeing Laci after approximately 10:18 a.m., when a neighbor saw her walking Mackenzie near the nearby dry creek bed, a route she often took. The neighbor described her as appearing fine, walking slowly due to her advanced pregnancy. By late afternoon, Laci still had not returned from what should have been a short walk. Scott arrived home around 4:30 to 5 p.m. He found the house quiet, Laci's car in the driveway, her purse and keys inside, the television on, and a bowl of chopped vegetables on the counter, evidence she had been preparing food. Mackenzie was in the backyard, still wearing his leash and collar, pacing and whining. Scott called Laci's mother to ask if she had heard from her daughter. When Sharon said no, Scott then contacted the Modesto Police Department at approximately 5:17 p.m. to report Laci missing. Officers arrived quickly and began searching the immediate area. The timeline of that Christmas Eve would become one of the most heavily scrutinized in American criminal history. Once Scott reported Laci missing at 5:17 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the Modesto Police Department responded swiftly. Officers conducted an initial walkthrough of the Covina Avenue home and the surrounding neighborhood. They noted the unusual details: the leash still on Mackenzie, the untouched food preparation, Laci's car and belongings undisturbed. No signs of forced entry or robbery were found. By nightfall, family members, Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, and her stepfather, arrived and joined the growing concern. Scott appeared visibly upset but composed. Police immediately classified Laci as a high-risk missing person due to her advanced pregnancy and the holiday timing. On Christmas Day, December 25th, the search intensified. Hundreds of volunteers, including friends, family, and community members, organized sweeps of local parks, the Dry Creek Trail where Laci often walked, irrigation canals, and open fields around Modesto. Search and rescue teams used dogs, helicopters, and boats. Posters featuring Laci's photograph, smiling, pregnant, in a floral dress, were printed by the thousands and distributed across Central California. Media coverage exploded overnight. Local stations broadcast live from the neighborhood. National networks like CNN and Fox News picked up the story, framing it as a heartbreaking Christmas disappearance of a pregnant woman. The public responded with an outpouring of support. Donations poured in, candlelight vigils were held, and tip lines were flooded. Scott participated publicly in the search efforts and gave early media interviews. He described Laci as a loving wife and expressed hope she would be found safe. Yet some observers noted inconsistencies in his demeanor, his calm delivery, occasional smiles during somber moments, which would later fuel suspicion. The search continued relentlessly through the following days and weeks, covering hundreds of square miles. It became one of the largest volunteer-driven missing person efforts in recent California history, but no trace of Laci or her unborn son was found in those early frantic weeks. As the search continued, Scott Peterson became the public face of the effort. He spoke to reporters outside the family home, describing Laci as his best friend and pleading for her safe return. In one early interview, he appeared calm and composed, even smiling faintly while discussing the tragedy. These moments were captured on camera and broadcast widely. Some viewers found his demeanor oddly detached, too controlled for a man whose pregnant wife was missing on Christmas. Family members initially defended him, but subtle inconsistencies in his accounts began to emerge. Police quietly shifted focus toward Scott as inconsistencies grew. The public, too, started questioning. Why the fishing trip on Christmas Eve? Why no immediate panic? Early doubts seeded suspicion that would soon dominate the case. In early January 2003, a major breakthrough emerged. Amber Frey, a 27-year-old single mother and massage therapist from Fresno, contacted the Modesto Police Department. She revealed she had been in a romantic relationship with Scott Peterson since late November 2002. Amber stated that Scott had told her he was unmarried and childless. He even claimed he would be spending Christmas alone because his wife had died earlier that year. When Amber saw news reports about Laci's disappearance, she realized the truth and decided to cooperate fully with investigators. She provided police with dozens of recorded phone conversations, many made after Laci vanished, in which Scott continued to lie about his life and whereabouts. These recordings became crucial evidence, exposing Scott's deception and shifting the investigation decisively toward him. Amber's decision to come forward marked a turning point in the case. The phone recordings Amber Fry provided were devastating. In over 30 conversations, many after Laci disappeared, Scott continued his elaborate lies. He told Amber he was in Paris for the holidays, then later claimed to be in Maine mourning his lost wife. On December 31, 2002, while police searched for Laci, Scott called Amber and casually discussed New Year's plans, never mentioning his missing pregnant wife. In another call on January 6, 2003, he spoke of attending a candlelight vigil for Laci, but told Amber it was for a different woman. These taped lies directly contradicted his public statements and showed premeditated deception. Prosecutors later used the recordings to demonstrate Scott's cold detachment and intent to cover his tracks, making them one of the strongest pieces of evidence against him. After more than 3 months of exhaustive searching on land, with no sign of Laci or her unborn son, the investigation took a grim turn toward the water. Scott had claimed his fishing trip on December 24 took him to the Berkeley Marina, launching his small aluminum boat into the San Francisco Bay. Police had searched the area earlier but found nothing conclusive. Then, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog along the shoreline in Richmond, California, about 15 miles north of the Berkeley Marina, made a horrific discovery. They spotted what appeared to be a human body partially submerged in shallow water among reeds and debris. Authorities were called immediately. The remains were badly decomposed due to exposure to salt water and marine life. The body was that of an adult female, missing her head, hands, and most of one foot, likely due to natural decomposition and scavenging. Dental records and DNA testing later confirmed it was Laci Peterson. Just 1 day later, on April 14, searchers found a second set of remains nearby. The body of a male infant, still partially encased in amniotic sac and umbilical cord attached. The fetus was identified as Connor Peterson through DNA comparison with Laci and Scott. Medical examiners estimated Connor had been born at or near full term, but there was no evidence he had taken a breath, meaning he died in utero or during the events surrounding Laci's death. The location of the recoveries was chilling, directly in line with the currents and tides from the Berkeley Marina, exactly where Scott said he had been fishing that Christmas Eve. Divers and boats had searched the bay multiple times before, but the bodies only surfaced after winter storms and tidal shifts brought them closer to shore. The discoveries ended any lingering hope of finding Laci alive and shifted the case from missing person to homicide. Public shock turned to outrage. Media helicopters circled the bay as images of the grim shoreline recovery were broadcast nationwide. For many, this was the moment the truth became undeniable. Laci and Connor had been disposed of in the very waters Scott claimed to have visited innocently. On April 18, 2003, just 5 days after the discovery of Laci's remains and 1 day after Connor's, Scott Peterson was arrested in San Diego County, near the Mexican border. He was spotted by a golf course resident who recognized him from news coverage. At the time of arrest, Scott had drastically changed his appearance. His dark hair was now bleached blonde, he wore a goatee and baseball cap, and he carried a backpack with essentials for fleeing. Inside his car and on his person, Police found over $15,000 in cash for cell phones, his brother's passport, Scott's own passport had expired, camping gear, a map of the area near the border, Viagra pills, and clothing that did not match his usual style. He had also dyed his hair and beard in a motel room shortly before. Investigators believed he was preparing to flee to Mexico. The arrest came swiftly after an anonymous tip and marked the end of his freedom. Scott was charged with 2 counts of murder, first degree for Laci and second degree for Connor, under California's fetal homicide law. He was extradited back to Modesto that same day. The public reaction was intense. Many saw the disguise and cash as clear signs of guilt and intent to evade justice. Scott Peterson's trial began on June 1, 2004, in Redwood City, California, after a change of venue for Modesto due to intense publicity. It lasted nearly 6 months and was broadcast live on national television. The prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, no confession. Key evidence included Scott's fishing trip to the exact area where bodies later washed up, the boat purchased shortly before, inconsistencies in his timeline, the Amber Fry recording showing lies, his changed appearance and attempt to flee with cash and fake documents. The defense argued reasonable doubt, possible burglary in the neighborhood that morning, no direct physical evidence linking Scott to the crime, and suggestions that Laci was abducted by strangers. They portrayed Scott as a grieving husband framed by media pressure. After 11 days of deliberation, on November 12, 2004, the jury found Scott guilty of first-degree murder for Laci and second-degree murder for Connor. Amber Fry became one of the prosecution's most powerful witnesses. She testified for several days in September 2004, recounting how she met Scott, their brief romance, and the lies he told her. The courtroom listened in silence as the recorded phone calls were played. Scott's voice calmly lying about being in Paris or mourning a deceased wife while Laci was missing. Amber described his complete lack of emotion or mention of his pregnant wife during those conversations. Her testimony, combined with the recordings, painted Scott as a calculating deceiver who was already planning a life without Laci. It severely damaged his credibility and helped convince the jury of his guilt. On November 12, 2004, after 11 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder in the death of their unborn son, Connor. The courtroom was silent as the words were read. Laci's family wept quietly. Scott showed no visible emotion. On March 18, 2005, Judge Alfred A. DeLucci sentenced Scott to death by lethal injection. He was immediately transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution on death row. The verdict was seen by many as justice for Laci and Connor, though others believed the case relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence. The death sentence would later face years of appeals and legal challenges. Scott Peterson's death sentence was automatically appealed. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death penalty but upheld the guilty verdicts due to issues in jury selection, specifically, the exclusion of certain jurors. The case was sent back for resentencing. In 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains at Mule Creek State Prison. Since then, the Los Angeles Innocence Project has taken up his case. They argue new evidence, possible DNA on duct tape found near the bodies, links to a burglary ring active in Modesto that morning, and claims of prosecutorial misconduct. As of early 2026, no major reversal has occurred, but legal motions continue, keeping the case alive in public debate. Many still believe the conviction stands firm. Others see room for doubt in this high-profile circumstantial case. Laci Peterson and her unborn son Connor never got to celebrate that first Christmas together. What began as a story of love, family, and holiday joy ended in betrayal, deception, and murder. This case stands as a stark example of femicide within intimate relationships. A husband who chose to eliminate his pregnant wife rather than face the responsibilities of fatherhood and fidelity. The lies to Amber Fry, the calculated disposal in the bay, the attempt to flee, all point to a cold rejection of the life he had built with Laci. More than 2 decades later, Laci and Connor remain symbols of the hidden dangers many women face in their own homes. Their story reminds us that domestic violence and control can hide behind smiles, suburban calm, and public charm. Justice was served in the courtroom, but the loss remains irreversible. This is the tragic legacy of Laci Peterson, a warning that love, when poisoned by selfishness, can turn deadly.